You're listening to the Executive Coach Podcast with me, Maya Goodker, and welcome to the Career Reboot series. This month, you'll be waking up to a daily curated series of episodes to listen to with your morning coffee. Your go-to guides to keeping you motivated, strategic, and able to have fun in your career, especially as some of us might be limping a little bit towards the summer holidays. And as you listen in this month, you might find it useful to have my Career Blindspots scorecard to hand, which you can download from the link in the show notes. So let's dive into today's episode. Today's question is, how do you make value visible in the workplace? I love this question because I think the first thing that it highlights is that we might sometimes assume that value is visible where it's not. We are the experts of our particular work. We understand what goes into it, the expertise required, and so much of the nuance and complexity that to anybody who is not doing that precise role, it's not going to be as obvious. So I think the first thing to identify here is if we want to make value visible for others, we will need to invest in spelling it out. So I've got a few simple suggestions around this, and this really does feed into that second chunky pillar of mine in my coaching program, which is all around social capital. So we want to have the infrastructure in place whereby we are able to share about what we're doing with key sponsors and have ways of doing that. In fact, I had a lovely email from a client this week, which was basically saying, thank you so much. I took your advice and I sent an email to this group who I think are going to be the real sponsors of this innovation project, which she's doing. This is, by the way, in the social work sector. She's doing an incredible innovation. And we were trying to figure out how she can get some real traction inside her organization. And we came to the idea that she might send a regular update, like a monthly email about where things were. She did this and she had such a tremendous response because her project really is on the money. It's really going to have a huge impact. And she, I think, was slightly shocked at what a positive impact it had. And that is the perfect example. All she did was give an update of where she'd moved things on since the last meeting. She generated interest and some follow-on activity through that email, as well as demonstrating the value of what she was doing. And so this is how value can be demonstrated through various mechanisms and communication mechanisms. So email can be one. If you're not in an email saturated environment and it's not going to get completely lost, you could let a particular stakeholder or sponsor know that you would love to send them a kind of a Friday afternoon email with just 3 bullets on what's going super well, what is a particular challenge right now with that project, and something that you'd like help on, for example. Right, so you're establishing these communication loops. And in the other episodes, the longer episodes, I've been talking about what the 1% do, the stuff that's not the default thinking. So it's not default thinking to send an email like that. When we've got a long list of other things that we want to tick off before we close down on a Friday, we're probably not really thinking about doing emails like that. But they don't need to take long. I used to do really quick emails like that, and they accumulate over time. They feed small amounts of information to your key stakeholders over time, so they build up a much richer picture of what you're actually doing. So I have talked there about some communication options and structures that you can put in place. I have acknowledged that these are not for the faint-hearted and they're not the default thing to do, but they provide a really leveraged impact. So yes, they will require 5 minutes for you to jot down those things. But I think that will be so well rewarded because the people that you really want to be invested in your work are going to feel much more nurtured, much more reassured, and they're probably also going to be thinking about your stuff a little bit more as a result. And that is visibility. That's what visibility is. The second way that you can do this, and again, this for those of you who are less process oriented, could feel like a little bit of a drag. So I want to make it a bit more fun for you. And that is to just keep a bit of a weekly task log of activity. Now, this is particularly valuable in larger organizations where you then have quarterly or 6 monthly or annual performance reviews. If you can have kept a project list running with specific issues and challenges as they arise, and you sort of update that on a weekly basis, and then you save the previous versions, you start to capture a really good running log of the stuff that you're working on. If you can put that in a shared drive where your line manager or whoever you report to can access it, you start to build up a bank of all the stuff that you're working on. And this can really minimize frustration. So often frustration occurs in work relationships where somebody has been working really hard on stuff and they've been doing loads of things. They've been delivering a lot of value. But what's visible to the person at the other end are a couple of flaws that individual then fixates on, right? And so if you fixate on a couple of flaws, that other 98% or 80% of your work almost feels like it's been completely ignored. It hasn't really been recognized in this process. And that can be really frustrating when you're working hard. And by communicating more of what you're doing and almost documenting it in a regular place, you can circumvent that. Because in that slightly more emotional moment, if somebody is challenging you on your work or, highlighting a particular error, which is, often what needs to be done, you also can feel really confident in everything else you're doing because you have a record of it. You have a log of what you've been up to. When I've been involved in projects, when I've sat outside organizations and I know that I am going to need to be paid for that work, I have been meticulous about my time logging. I will capture, time spent composing emails to different stakeholders and all of that stuff. And once you're in the habit of it, it's a lot easier than it is initially. But I just knew that at some point, my fee could be questioned, and I needed to be able to break down very clearly all of that less visible work that I was doing, that when you kind of see the final products, you won't necessarily know that that's had to take place. And the only way that that stuff is going to be visible is if you have had a documentation process in place. So where you can, set up a quick file, could be notes, could be Excel, and just start that documentation process. It doesn't need to be perfect. Link it to a good thinking time of day. So it could be first thing in the morning with a cup of coffee, or it could be just a final thing you do before you close your laptop. It could be, okay, let me just jot down 5 things that I have been, working on today, or 5 biggest uses of my time today. And you start to build that muscle. And you start to be able to articulate some of the stuff that you're doing that is just much less visible. So I hope that's given you a few thoughts on how you can make value visible. The final one, which I think is really interesting, is in the upfront conversations, the upfront planning conversations. So when you're in the setup phase of a new project, or you're starting to work with somebody new, or it's just the beginning of a new period, you can have these types of conversations where you can really say, look, what do you perceive as value here? What is valuable to you? Let me understand what that is as I do my work, so that I can ensure that my work is aligned with that. And that way you've understood what matters to them from a value perspective. But you may also need to show them that in order for you to be able to deliver that value, other less visible things need to take place. And you can make them aware of what those things are. And you can have a much more aligned conversation. So I hope that helps you in your visibility and value journey. Let me know how it goes. And again, this is stuff that I talk about in my masterclass. So definitely check that out if you haven't already, and let me know what you think of it. All right. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to Life Work with Maya. If you've got to this point, I'm guessing you found it valuable. So do share the link with somebody else who can benefit. In an age of materialism and us trying to stay on top of clutter, what could be nicer than to send a non-clutter digital link to somebody and say, I listened to this and I thought you might love it. What a great way to show your care and consideration for them. If you haven't left a review, now is the time, and make sure that you are subscribed on Spotify or you're following along on Apple Podcasts. And if you really want to help the show grow, then do share the link on IG stories, Instagram stories, or reshare or discuss your thoughts with my LinkedIn posts. You can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Do feel free to send me messages there. I love having dialogue with my listeners, and the links to those handles are in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to connecting with you next time. Bye-bye.